Being smart is recognized as cool. Being capable is recognized as cool. But the institution that's designed to make people smart and capable sucks. Because our brains are not actually wired to be critical thinkers. We're wired to be tribal. We're wired to agree with our group. Because if we disagree with our group, then we are ousted from that group, and that's not good for survival. So it is actually against our nature, and which is why it's so difficult to do. I think that being a critical thinker, part of that is seeing through the emotional cloudiness, and that could be about politics, it could be about all kinds of different things going on in your life, seeing through that and getting to as close to objective truth as you can. And I think the pathway through that is viewpoint diversity and challenging your own beliefs.
Remember, adversity is your advantage.
Hey friends, cannot wait for you to check out the new episode of the CEO Show. I just interviewed my dear friend William Reusch, and Will is a civics teacher turned entrepreneur. And if you want to learn about the state of the education system, if you want to learn how to develop critical thinking skills, or if you want to learn about the importance of free speech, you got to check out this episode. Hey, welcome back friends. If you're new to the show, my name is Bryce Henson, and I'm the host of the CEO Show podcast, where we teach leadership, promote capitalism, and defend free speech. I want to welcome my man Will to the show.
What's going on, Bryce? Good to see you, man.
Holy smokes. Well, we just shot your intro, but man, this is awesome to connect. And you are a teacher. You're also a strategic developer of critical thinking in education. And I feel like critical thinking is an art form that's been lost. So when we connected, I was like, man, I got to get you on the show, talk about your background, talk about critical thinking, talk about free speech was one of the pillars of the show. So super pumped to have you on.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. I think the more we get the word out about what critical thinking is and how to implement it more in society, I think the better. I think it's just how we get through a lot of problems.
Totally. All right. Well, let's start with your backstory, if you will. You got into the education space. So I'm curious, what's your journey into education been and how did you arrive there?
Yeah, so went to college for secondary education, social studies, graduated, moved out to California, and then just started working in schools. I've worked in different schools. I worked in like the poorest areas of LA and the richest areas of LA. I worked with 17-year-old mothers of three and who couldn't even tell an analog clock, and then like the kids of billionaires. So it's really cool to get that like perspective of a whole bunch of different teenagers, and you look for what is similar and what is different. And then in about 2016, probably around the time the like Trump election was happening, I saw a lot of things happening on college campuses and in society that showed a real lack of critical thinking, a lot of vilifying, people who thought differently and stuff like that. So I started a social media account and a podcast and started bringing this stuff into my classroom. And that's just kind of taken on a trajectory of its own. Yeah.
What do you think inspired you initially to become a teacher?
I've got asked that question a lot because I'm good at my job, and typically a lot of parents and stuff would be like, how did you find this? Because I want my kids to find something that they're good at and they love doing. And I was like, I didn't have a great answer until, probably almost a decade in. And what I realized was being smart is recognized as cool. Being capable is recognized as cool. When you're watching a movie, reading a book, it's like, oh, this person, they can handle themselves. That's all cool. But the institution that's designed to make people smart and capable sucks. So there was a real disconnect there. It didn't make sense to me. And I was like, I can do better than my teachers. I can do better than them. So I just wanted to connect it just right down to not just learning what a covalent bond is or what magma is or something along those lines, but really like how this is going to help you to be a more capable person in the world, a more active, informed, contributing citizen in the world. And I said, I could do that better than what's out there. I just saw the bar was really low for educators, honestly.
Totally.
Yeah.
All right. One of the things I love what you're doing, by the way, I love your mission, I love your ethos, is really talking about civics education. So from your perspective, why is civics education important, especially in 2024?
Man, so civics, the way I explain it, is the rights and responsibilities of citizenship. Okay, so when you have a bunch of rights, and that's focused on a lot in schools, you're allowed to do this, you're allowed to do that, you're allowed to do that, right? But once you have the choices of what to do, you can do all these things, then you have to decide what should you do. And that's where the responsibility comes in. I think that we focused far too much on rights. You can't do that to me, or you can't do that to me, as opposed to what is on me to do. What is my responsibility to contribute to making the world more beautiful, more efficient, more ethical? I mean, those are things that I push on my students and the people who I teach is, what is your responsibility to make the world a better place? Essentially, in the way that you see fit. And we're going to disagree on what that might be, but you got to be an active participant. You can't just be on the bench. So I think civics education today, there's a lot of things wrong in the world. How do they get fixed? By knowing your rights and then taking up responsibility to fix those things that you see needing fixed.
Yeah. I love that. Rights and responsibilities. Because, I mean, rights are important. We feel like we grew up in an amazingly beautiful country here in the States, which has its fair share of issues. But at the end of the day, holy smokes, man, how lucky we are. And we always talk about rights. You hear that. Yeah. But sometimes I think rights can be weaponized, if you will, and really from like an entitlement approach. So the responsibility aspect is so important. And I'm a leadership student. I'm a leadership expert. And really leadership comes down to responsibility. As citizens of our country, as citizens of a society that's productive, you have to own it. You have to have responsibility. You have to contribute as well, which is why I love just about the narrative.
Yeah, and what's going to serve, especially young people, what's going to serve you more? You know, like if you're trying to build up young people to be strong, independent, being able to build the life that they want and things like that, it's taking responsibility, you know, taking ownership. You know, there's a lot that's pushed in schools today about, you know, victimization. And if you want to see yourself as a victim, you can. We all can. We can all see ourselves as a victim because we're victims in a million different ways. But you can also see yourself as someone who overcomes all of those things, take on the responsibility, and then go out and be like the hero of your own story. And I think that's just being lost in a lot of schools and a lot of educational institutions. And that's something that I want to bring back.
Dude, love it. My leadership philosophy is turning adversity into your advantage. And
there you go.
I look at it as like you can be victimized, but never be a victim. You know, victimized is a situation where, hey, you caught the short end of the stick. But at the end of the day, being a victim from my perspective is like this mental state, and it's this, I guess, disease, if you will. And you can either be the victim or the hero or the champion. You can't be both.
Yeah, I mean, look, one of the ways I explain it is if you're going to, you know, cross the street and you get the little walking guy and you start walking down the street and a car runs a red light and hits you. Okay, like you're a victim. That's terrible, and justice needs to be played out. Whether that's, you know, jail time for the person or whatever it might be, you know, penalties in civil court. But that's not going to help you get better. So what you have to do is say, how was this my fault? And you could say all day long, it's not my fault. I had the right of way. He didn't. But if you say, you know what, I could have looked left and looked right better. I could have been paying attention. I could have been off my phone. Then you will get better. And that's what young people need to understand. I think adults need to understand that too, is what's going to level you up? What's going to make you better? So you're better today than you were yesterday, and you'll be better tomorrow than you are today. And I think taking responsibility for what is in your control. You can't control that car running the red light, but you can control where you look, and you can control your physical therapy, and you can control a whole bunch of other things. So I think aiming for that more than just blaming the driver, which seems to be really in vogue right now.
Amen, man. Amen. Yeah. Kindred spirit, dude. All right. We talked a little about critical thinking. I want to dive deeper. And a lot of your work is around complex issues, around critical thinking as well. What motivated you to prioritize these in your work?
So part of it is I'm just naturally a curious person. So leaning into my God-given curiosity naturally, I think it came easy for me. I never thought of myself in front of a classroom as like the sage on the stage. I never thought like I have all the answers. I still don't, but I go through that process of what could I be missing? I think that there's a real value. I think that curiosity is smart. If you're in a room and you're like, oh man, everyone here is so much smarter than me, then just get curious. Start asking questions. And if you say like, you know, I'm going to ask a dumb question, you only have to ask a dumb question one time. And you remember the answer, you're not going to have to ask that. And then your questions get better and better and better. So I saw it as a hack, honestly. I saw it as a hack to get closer and closer to the right answers. And you put yourself out there. And if you're wrong and someone proves that you're wrong, good. You exchange what your old idea was for a new idea. Now you've leveled up. And you just do that constantly. But our brains, like the neuroscience behind it, is our brains are not actually wired to be critical thinkers. We're wired to be tribal. We're wired to agree with our group, because if we disagree with our group, then we are ousted from that group, and that's not good for survival. So It is actually against our nature, and which is why it's so difficult to do.
I want you to define it from your perspective. And it's interesting. I mean, you come from the education background. I come from the business and entrepreneur background. But at the end of the day, you want your students, I want my people, my leaders, my teammates to critically think, not just take the playbook. And certainly it's important to follow the playbook at times, but also to see around corners and say like, does this really make sense? Because a lot of times when you get smart people together, and if you don't really encourage an environment where people can, you know, critically think and can make their own recommendations. What happens in my perspective is a lot of times bad decisions arise from that. So how would you describe and really define critical thinking from your lens?
I would say it's objective thinking. It's emotions are wonderful. It's what makes us human. One of the things that makes us human, but they do cloud your judgment. It does cloud your rational thinking. So I think that being a critical thinker, part of that is seeing through the emotional cloudiness, and that could be about politics, could be about all kinds of different things going on in your life, seeing through that and getting to as close to objective truth as you can. And I think the pathway through that is viewpoint diversity and challenging your own beliefs.
How do you challenge your own beliefs?
Yeah.
It sounds basic, but I feel like most people don't.
So hard.
Yeah,
it's so hard. There's a phrase called straw manning a position. So you basically, if you're in a disagreement over a controversial issue with somebody, that you represent their side in the worst possible way and then attack that, as opposed to what is called steel manning, which is you find the best argument for their side and then you attack that. So I taught debate and coached debate for like 11 years. And we could just take a controversial issue, whatever it is, guns or something like that. And let's say that you're, a pro Second Amendment person and you're arguing against, guns or for regulation or something along those lines. So what you do is you don't find the worst argument, against guns. You find the absolute best. You study that and you become an expert on why guns are bad, for lack of a better term. Okay. And then when you're in some sort of debate or conversation, then you can highlight their point of view better than they even can. And then on top of that, say why you disagree. It's almost like in 8 Mile, where Eminem just makes fun of himself and then throws him the mic. He has nothing to say. Yeah. I think that by doing that, you're going to understand why people disagree with you. And if you understand why people disagree with you, then we can not be united that we shouldn't all agree, but we should disagree better. And if you can represent why people disagree with you really, really well, then you can have conversations and we can find compromise.
Whew. That doesn't come naturally. It reminds me of, I'm a huge fan from a visionary and entrepreneur perspective of Elon Musk. And he introduced a principle which years ago is a physics principle called first principles. And it's really like whittling down everything to like its basic form of truth and then lodging up there. And it's not a very natural way to think, but it's like an engineering way to think. And I think from like a critical thinking and debating perspective, what I just gleaned from you, it's just like, that's an engineering way of thinking of how to think about complex problems and, certainly, political problems and, things that are facing our society.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I was in a conversation with Eric Weinstein, who's like a very smart mathematician guy. And he's like, Will, a lot of people claim to be first principles thinkers. I think you actually are. Yeah. Now, I always thought of myself as just being like overly simplistic in the way that I think. My mind's always going, but I do understand things from like a very like base level. And I think that's helped me in education a lot because you just go down to the very, like a car, you go down to the basic parts of a car and then you can rethink a car, which is what Elon Musk did. Yeah. Okay, so when we were trying to understand society and build a better society, instead of just like adding something here to what it is, you go all the way to the base. And then you can rethink how to do that. And I think that's how innovators work. And that's why the name of my platform is called PatterDox. It's the idea that we're not studying like a specific battle or a specific war even. We're studying conflict and conflict resolution. And then the same reason why you might fight with your brother or sister or fight with your parents or fight with your spouse is really why we have global wars too. It's over resources. It's over different ideologies. You get to the core of these ideas and then you can make sense of the world as a whole. Mm-hmm. If you understand the first principles of things, then you can go out into the world and you can make educated guesses about what's going to happen. Like when crazy stuff goes on, whether it's an election or COVID or whatever it is, people come to me and they're like, help me make sense of this. I don't know, but what I can do is go down to the basic principles of it from studying history and things like that, and then walk them through those steps of what I believe to be happening. And some of the stuff that you and I have talked about is like, how do we predict this? Because we've seen this over and over again because we know the underlying principles behind it.
Dude, well, this is mind-blowing. Do you think this for you specifically comes factory installed? Is this a learned behavior? And you've already discussed a few strategies, but if someone's like listening and watching this, I remember for me when I was listening to Elon Musk talk about first principles the first time, I was like blown away, but then I was like, all right, how do I learn more about this and how do I think like this? So, give us some strategies.
Yeah, I think it's both. I think I am naturally a bit like that, but what really did it was exposure to other ideas. My wife is from a completely different culture. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm like white waspy guy from the Northeast. She's from the Philippines. Okay, I grew up like, on the left side of politics. She's on the right side of politics. She's an entrepreneur. I'm a school teacher. Like we were so different. But it was my favorite person on the planet. So I couldn't just say that they're bad people. So I had to figure this out. And then moving to LA, there's a whole bunch of differences. I think the hack is to surround yourself with different minded people with different beliefs, different backgrounds and stuff like that, people that you respect, and surround yourself with them on equal footing and get curious about why they think what they think instead of vilifying right away. Because we're so quick to say you're wrong because you think this way. But a lot of that's been pushed on us from media or from our surroundings, from our culture, and instead get really curious. But I think the more you surround yourself with people who think differently than you and you get curious about them, I think that's the best way to get to where you're going.
Dude, man, I love this. I literally last week, actually, today, I wrote it last week, a blog post, a leadership exercise around the value of being curious. And I looked at it from a framework of you gain exposure to new ideas and thoughts you'd never learn if you weren't curious. And then also you build relationships so, easily, because what do people like talking about themselves? So when you get curious, you create connection and you gather great ideas. So I love it's a topic of conversation here.
And diversity, like in the business world, diversity, it's not just skin deep stuff. It's not based on gender and race. It can be, but really what benefits a business is going to be diversity of ideas. What's going to level you up? It's going to be the blind spots. And people can look very different. It's like a laptop with different colors or different cases, but it's the software that really matters. So if people are in groupthink, so it's all people that might look differently, like demographically, but they all think the same, there's going to be blind spots.
Totally.
And so the way to get to highlight those blind spots so you don't have them in anything, but especially I think in the business world, is to bring in people who think totally differently than you. And that could be biologically, that could be culturally, it could be a whole bunch of different things. And you pick their brain, and then you get all these different ideas. I like to think of I teach politics. So I like to think of the left and right of politics almost like a yin yang. Like there's like a tension there, and in that, you get to the best ideas. The civil rights movement wasn't just Martin Luther King. There was Martin Luther King, but then there was also like Stokely Carmichael, who was a lot more radical. And so there was like the progressives pushing these ideas of like equal rights. And then there were the conservatives that were like, ooh, like almost like a doorman at a club. It's like, no, you can't, what do you want to do? Like tear down the entire American system, make it socialistic? No. What do you want to do? Treat people based on the content of their character, not their skin color? Yeah, you can get in the club. And so the conservatives in this way kind of acted as a filter for all the progressive ideas, some of which are good, some of which are bad. But you need them both.
Yeah.
You can't just have one side. And I think that goes for business as well. As you bring in people who are diverse in their perspectives, I think that's how you're going to be able to solve problems most efficiently.
Love it. All right. You mentioned PatterDox. I want to go there for a second. Before I do, I want to still glean a little bit about your insights to the education system, because it's your background. So what are the significant challenges you see, Will, in today's current education system concerning two things: critical thinking, and then we'll talk a little bit more about this in this conversation, free speech.
Okay, so as far as critical thinking goes, you go to any teacher around the country and you say, do you promote critical thinking? They'll say, yeah. But then you step on what would be kind of labeled as a third rail topic. Okay, we kind of know what those topics are. It could be about race and gender and all kinds of stuff like that. You ask about that, and instantly the critical thinking goes away.
Right.
So critical thinking is something that needs to be universally applied. It's kind of I think like empathy should be universally applied.
Yeah, of course.
It's not just I'm empathetic toward the people that agree with me. I think that critical thinking needs to be universally applied, and that's what's missing in schools. I think that it's missing in some red states when it comes to certain things, like they're just all on the conservative side. But I think it's missing in a lot of other states because of the education colleges and everything that do have a very strong left lean. And again, I'm not against the left. I'm not against the right. I want that balance. I want the yin yang. I don't want it to be 90% white and just a little bit of black, or vice versa. We need that balance, and that balance is strongly off in education.
What role do you think education should play in being able to providing access and recommendation teaching around critical thinking?
I think that the teachers need to do their own kind of due diligence in challenging themselves. I think that teachers have and I love teachers. I think there's great teachers. That's been my career my whole life. Okay, but I think we do have a problem of taking on certain challenges. I think that to become a classroom teacher, you're almost like a soft-hearted lot. Like we're like soft-hearted. So when you see someone as marginalized, it could be for a whole bunch of different reasons, but you see someone as marginalized, you again, the emotions come into play and you can't become a critical thinker. But the teachers are empathetic. It's part of why we get into it. So we feel sympathy is like, I feel bad for what you're going through. Empathy is I actually feel what you're going through.
Right.
And teachers are empathetic, but there's a flip side to empathy. The most dangerous animal in the forest is the mother bear. Why? Because if you look to your left and you see a cubs, and you look to your right and you see the mom, you're screwed. Okay? Because the flip side of empathy is I will attack you viciously if you do something that I see as harmful or threatening to the vulnerable. And think about how that plays out in society. People who talk about empathy so big. Empathy is such a big a part of a real faction of society. Is how are they so vicious then towards certain people, towards certain politicians, towards certain people? The reason why they're so vicious is they see you as a threat to the marginalized. They see you as a threat to the vulnerable. So they see certain groups as vulnerable, and then they see you as a threat to that, so they will be vicious towards you. And I think that's happening in education a lot. There's almost like a toxic compassion element. It comes from a good place, but it plays out in really, really dangerous, ugly ways.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. Next up, I want to talk a little bit about social media. And Will, you've done a great job of building a really, really strong social media presence, talking about critical thinking, about free speech, et cetera. How and why have you recently transitioned out of the classroom to be a voice around these broader topics in the public discourse? And then secondarily, you talked a little bit about PatterDox. I would love to unpack that box.
Absolutely. So in 2018, I started a social media platform because I was talking about the stuff that I was watching going on college campuses with like Jordan Peterson and Brett Weinstein, Nicholas Christakis at Yale. And I was like, ooh, that's happening in schools too. Where are the K through 12 teachers? Where are the high school teachers talking about this? And there weren't any. So I was talking about it in my classroom. And then my wife, who does social media marketing, was like, just put the stuff you're doing in your classroom, put it online. And I was in the mindset of like, I got to be a dancing monkey up there sometimes for 16-year-olds. So I was like, no one's going to want to voluntarily take my class. So I started and it grew.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of it, it wasn't just kids. It's mostly like adults. It's mostly people in like their 30s and 40s that follow me because of the way that I take my approach. I'm not pushing anything on anybody,
Brilliant.
But it is trying to get people to think a little bit.
By the way, I'm going to hit this at the end, but if someone hasn't followed you, what's your social media handle? They can.
Yeah, it's just my name. It's just Will Reusch, WILLREUSCH.
Perfect. And we'll put all that, but I just wanted to plug you because you teach fire, and I feel like you do it in such a way that it's enlightening, it's critical thinking, and I just think it's a great platform and a great sounding board that we all should consume your content, man.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate that. I mean, I believe in it.
Yeah.
It's not just to be like Insta famous or anything like that. It really is the same reason I got into teaching. It's the same thing. It's
you
along
can
the same
sense
exact
it.
vein.
You can sense it.
Yeah. But then as that was growing, I was like, wow, I can teach across the screen. Interesting. I can teach across the screen. And then COVID happened. I was teaching remotely. So I was teaching all my classes across Zoom. And it wasn't ideal because it wasn't designed for that, but it made me realize it's possible. It's possible. It's possible to teach to the masses, whatever it is, followers I have, 40,000 or something like that.
Yeah.
A classroom might have 25. When I was teaching in East LA, I had like 48, which is a little crazy. But but you're still limited by size. There's a scale element. Actually, Bryce, I'm curious to your thoughts on this from a business standpoint because if you look at, Jordan Peterson, it's good that he left his classroom at University of Toronto. You look at Andrew Huberman or someone like that. It's good he left the lab. Peter Attia, it's good. Everything with the company, with your fitness company is like, it's good that it's not just one location. You can get out to all these people. There's something about scale and impact that's so obvious. And what PatterDox is that within education. It's that, and it's a hard thing to scale because it's kind of like teaching or firefighting is like there's so much personal connection there. But if it's baked in, if it's built into it, then it's possible. And it's interesting how even though my following isn't like massive with millions of people or anything like that, the people that do follow, I do connect with, and it does feel that way.
Engagement's so high, man. I mean, I love the content, like the comments, there's a great dialogue and great discourse there, which I think is just inspiring.
Yeah. Now, I'm a little concerned about building this community that I have on Instagram. So part of PatterDox is teaching teenagers. So it's like U.S. history and civics and things like that. But there's a whole other wing of it that I'm in the process of building right now. That's called the Roundtable. That's going to be essentially a social media type forum, but for people that aren't in school, like K through 12 school, because I don't trust Mark Zuckerberg or whoever. Even Elon Musk, like on Twitter, I just don't trust these tech companies with being able to have free conversations.
Well, that's my topic of my next conversation. You saw my notes here, man, which is free speech, government censorship. And, we saw Elon Musk, speaking of him, expose the Twitter files. The UK is like openly censoring right now. And last month, recently, Mark Zuckerberg just shared the pressure that he received from the U.S. government, okay, not a private institution, the U.S. government, that the Biden administration put against Meta to censor a lot of things, but including COVID. So I have a lot of thoughts on this. And actually, before I open up to you, one of the big ahas that I saw that like really, shook me, if you will, was when Elon exposed the Twitter files and when seeing government intervention and censorship. And this is something, and I'm a free speech, absolutist. Yeah. I'm a free market capitalist. I believe if you have a private company, you can and should be able to execute that however you want. But when you have a third party, a government intervention, this is stuff that you see in North Korea. This is stuff that you see in China. This is stuff that you see in Venezuela. Never in a million years that I thought this would hit the the United States of America shores. So that rattled me. And that was really one of many reasons I decided to rebrand this podcast, to really create open dialogue where we can critically think and have discussions and figure out, okay, what are the best ideas? Because my belief that when you have an environment where you have open dialogue, where you have good ideas and bad ideas, eventually human nature, I trust in human nature, will scout out and the good ideas will rise, the bad ideas will fall. But when you have an environment where there's fear, when there's censorship, you can't share, eventually what happens, and history is lined with this, bad ideas rise and good ideas fall, and that's catastrophic for human nature. So from my perspective, that was a big aha. I'm curious on your overall thoughts, and I have a lot of other questions I want to drill into.
Yeah, our founding fathers were brilliant, and they knew that would be a problem. So that's why the First Amendment is making sure that there's free speech.
Yeah,
because they knew about the dangers of censorship, but they found a workaround. So they are private companies. They're private companies, so they can do whatever they want. But when the United States government comes after you and says, here's what we strongly recommend, what are you going to do? And Matt Taibbi, who was the main reporter for the Twitter files, he got audited right away. So you want the national government coming after you? And they will do that for speaking out. They did with Tulsi Gabbard recently.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is terrifying. And if you're trying to run a business, now, even if you're a big business, you're trying to run a business, you care about your employees, you care about, making payroll and stuff like that, you just bend the knee because I don't want to upset the national government.
Right.
But that's a workaround, so they would say it's technically not unconstitutional, but it clearly is. It's a loophole that's clearly unconstitutional, and it's scary.
Totally.
It's scary for people because once you grab their tongue and you can't allow people to speak, stuff that was happening during the pandemic. They're saying all the doctors are saying, they're all in agreement. But then we know now that the doctors that were not in agreement were censored and shut down and getting their licenses taken away.
Yeah.
Luckily, someone like Joe Rogan just has a platform big enough that he was able to put them on because he has kind of like FU money and in a situation and stuff like that. But for the people that don't, then they can't. So it's a really scary thing because that's where we find out what's true or not is through news, through media. And when the media is controlled by the government, that's like part of the definition of fascism is when the government and private industry are all working together with the media. And it's interesting from a lot of it comes from the side of politics that call themselves fighting fascism. It's ironic to say the least.
It's like hypocritical, man. Yeah. Like it's wild to me.
Yeah.
Wild to me. You were sharing a little bit off camera, back in COVID, you were censored as well. What did that look like? And curious on your perspective.
Well, what's interesting is I'm doing things always in real time. Like I'm an open book.
Yep.
So I'll put my ideas out there and then I'll be proven wrong a lot. And it's kind of nice because I can show hey, you take shots and you miss and then you learn from it. So I got a vaccine. I got see, even me saying that word, I worry about something happening to the podcast, and I always have because it's I've been programmed now to not talk about it.
Well, we got to talk about it, man.
We have to. Yeah. And so I got the vaccine, I got the follow-up, and then I got a booster too. But I had friends who were vaccine injured, and I gave them a platform. So they came on my podcast, and I did some Instagram lives, just like, tell me your story. Because I knew a woman who got really, really sick from it. And I was just like, tell me your story. And she just told me her story. It was really sad, and it was really, really tough what she was going through and still going through. And since then, like 100 people, 200 people sent me, they had to type in my full name all the way up to the H in the last letter of my last name before my Instagram would come up. And people would write me like, did you shut down your account? I mean, this was for months. Mm-hmm. The hashtag natural immunity, which is like basic, medical school
science.
First day stuff, basic stuff. You get the chicken pox once type of stuff. That was blocked for over 2 years.
Wild.
It's unbelievable. It's really, really scary. And I think that people just kind of go, whatever, or they're busy. People are just busy. They go to work, they come home, they got 2 kids, a cat, and a mortgage and all this stuff, and so they don't pay attention. But for those of us that are, I think getting the word out is really, really important.
Dude, man. I mean, for me, I thought there'd be riots in the streets when I discovered this a year ago, 2023. And you're right. I mean, just, this overwhelm, people are busy and all that. But this is a bit of my protest, my riot, if you will. And, I want to do good by humanity and society. I believe that the principles of leadership, I believe the principles of free market capitalism, and I believe the principles of free speech are just imperative to human prosperity. And this is why we're having the conversation, my friend.
Yeah, and it's not like I talk about like conspiracy theories a lot, and put on the tinfoil hat, but it's actually not that crazy when you think about. I mean, for the business owners out there, if your business grows to like a gargantuan size, aren't you going to do everything you can to stack the deck in your favor? So if you're an online company and there's a disease going around, aren't you going to do everything you can to get the government to just like shut things down so people have to buy online? Is it that crazy that you would do that? If you own an ice cream shop, okay, and you had a control to just raise the temperature a little bit of the earth, maybe you do that. If you have a lemonade stand, like you might do that, because not even that you're a villain twisting your mustache, but just you have 20,000 employees who have families, you got to provide for them, and you have shareholders who got to help their 401ks, and a lot of people who have an index fund or something like that. Like, you justify it, but what companies are going to do that, and that's why the big companies who have massive lobbyists are doing that. And pharmaceutical industry, which does wonderful things too. They keep grandma alive and they give you penicillin, but they have over 1,500 lobbyists when there's 535 members of Congress. So every member of Congress has 3 full-time lobbyists on them to give them information and steer them, because how many things can you be an expert about if you're a congressperson? Like, you can't, but your job is to be judicious about what's real or not. But one side has a whole lot more influence over you, and they use that to push this stuff. And Albert Bourla, the CEO of Pfizer, said, we're not going to make any money off of that. And then what happened? Record profits. I mean, this is just happening. It's not anything that unusual. I think it's just the way all businesses work. You're going to try and stack the deck in the favor of your company a little bit. And this is a business podcast. They'll all do that. But when you get to a certain size, then it becomes really influential on the whole country. And the government's job is to regulate that. That's the job of the government, is to make sure that you don't end up in control. But what's happened is something I talk about in my civics class, which is regulatory capture, where the regulatory agencies are controlled by the very companies or the very entities that they're supposed to be regulating. So, for example, the Secretary of Defense is a guy named Austin. Oh, shoot, Lloyd Austin, sorry. Lloyd Austin, his job before he was Secretary of Defense was he was on the board of trustees of Raytheon. So he was in charge. He worked at the missile factory, and now he's in the job that decides if they're going to use and sell missiles. It's crazy. If you look at who these donors are and who the FDA, something unbelievable, like 70% of the funding for drugs for the FDA comes from the pharmaceutical industries. John Abramson wrote an incredible book about how this whole thing works. And it's mind-blowing, but that's what we have now. So these companies really do run the show because they control government. And again, nothing too crazy about that. Every company, if you can get a senator in your pocket, wouldn't you do that?
You would.
You would.
Yeah.
You get a senator in California that says, like, you have to take an accredited, boot camp in order to lower your insurance or something like that. And here's the list of accredited one. Okay, it's your company.
Yep.
You're going to do that. I'm going to do that. We're all going to do that. These people aren't just like villains. They're just acting in human ways, but it's at the expense of the population.
Amen. Now let's critically think for a second.
Let's do it.
On the other side of the coin, if you're listening to this, because the other argument is, well, hate speech and all that, which no one wants to hear hate speech. No one condones that. Or I shouldn't say no one. There are bad people out there, but good people, right? The vast majority, from my perspective, are good human beings. But what do you say to that side of the argument?
It's a really good question. I love the Socratic method. Socrates just walked around Athens, asked people questions. That's it. Just ask people questions, then follow-up questions. And people got so upset that they killed him for asking questions, corrupting the youth, ironically enough, from my profession. But my question would be, define hate speech.
And that was my thought, because it's impossible to define from my perspective, at least.
Okay, so let me step on the third rail. Men can't be women. Is that hate speech? I hate Donald Trump. Is that hate speech? I hate Joe Biden. Is that hate speech? Caitlyn Jenner is a man, a biological man with XY chromosomes. Is that hate speech? Like, it comes down to who's going to define it. And the answer is essentially going to be the people who are in charge. Not necessarily the experts, but it's the people in charge. The people who have, the sword. The people in government, the ones who have the coercive power. And so the question I would always have is define hate speech. And it's a sincere question.
Yeah, I can't.
It's kind of like I saw something recently posted about banning assault weapons. Okay, yeah, like no one. We don't want to be hateful. We don't want dangerous weapons, perhaps, just on the streets in the hands of anybody. But define assault weapon. Like California did that. They had like a definition. It was like detachable magazine, long groove barrel, pistol grip. There was like different things. So all they did was do a loophole, a workaround, and they just worked the grip into the stock of it, and it no longer fits the definition. So it's no longer an assault weapon. Mm-hmm. Nothing changed. The function of it didn't change at all. And so what you have to be careful about when you define things. There's always going to be workarounds. But the question I would have for hate speech is, yeah, it's not good, but that's what free speech is. Free speech is the ability to speak freely, openly. Mm-hmm. And if it's bad ideas or bad speech, then you have to combat that with better speech.
Amen to that.
It's a responsibility element.
And, it's interesting. If you look at human history from my lens, right? Nazi Germany, pot in Cambodia, Mao in China. I mean, there's a consistent element at all of these particular regimes, and it comes down to censorship, and it comes down to limit of free speech. And there's always, and I look back at this, Will, and literally growing up, when I studied Nazi, Germany, I was like, how could a population be convinced to basically follow Hitler and do these atrocities? Not going to lie, man, when seeing COVID and all the stuff coming out and seeing human nature respond, I actually know exactly how people conform and people are afraid. And if you have an element of that, censorship at play, it can manipulate people's minds very easily.
Yeah, people like to think that they would hide Anne Frank in their attic, but no, you would most likely report her. And that's what we see. And you say like, well, no, that has to do with life and death. What was the language used during COVID? Life or death, right? So, and I mean, Germany was in a really desperate economic time. I mean, it was bad. People were starving to death on the street and stuff like that. You get this quote unquote big powerful leader to say, hey, this is the way we're going to get out of this, get behind it. And for a while it worked. They were able to rise up economically. But really what happened was Joseph Goebbels, who was like the propaganda minister, they pushed a lot of anti-Semitism, and it's like, go kill, Herschel down the street or whatever, go after the Jewish people in the population. People are like, no, I know Herschel. He's a good guy. He runs a bakery. I'm not going to do that. So then they gave out these very inexpensive radios all throughout Germany. They were very cheap, and there was one channel essentially, and it was the government channel, and they did a lot of anti-Semitic broadcasts and stories and things like that. And then when they tried it again, it's like Kristallnacht, and that's like all the things that led to it. So people are susceptible to the media, and the Nazis knew that. So how did people fall into that? Well, it's because they were programmed by the media, controlled by the government to do it. I mean, that's how. And that same thing happened during COVID. You were talking about the thing that happened last month that Mark Zuckerberg revealed. It's like what the government was doing was putting out this narrative that if you didn't get the vaccine, or you spoke out against it, or you didn't socially distance, or you didn't wear a mask, then you were a bad person.
Right.
And you wanted to kill grandma, and you wanted all of these bad things. And there was a tweet that went out by the White House years ago that was, if you got the vaccine, you're great job, you did your part to contribute to society. And if you didn't, the hospitals would be clogged up with death, thanks to you. I mean, that's like directly from the White House. And those narratives matter. People start to believe that. So if you hear it enough times, you start to believe it. And that's exactly what happened.
Interestingly enough, we just had our World Conference for Fit Body Boot Camp, which is our annual big conference, our biggest in franchise history. And one of my dear friends, very well-known medical doctor, her name is Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. And one of the things that she taught was people actually don't believe the truth. People believe what they're consistently told over and over again. And human nature will actually believe things that we hear over and over again, whether they're factual or not. So that just really plays into your point about, human nature and how we can be influenced very easily from that lens. And
taking it back to what critical thinking is then, so if everyone's on board with one idea, challenge that idea. That's why, I'm called like a kook all the time because people say like, what do you think we didn't land, do you think we didn't land on the moon? It's like, oh, you believe in the moon? Like I don't know anything, man. Like let's just challenge stuff. And then what you do is you challenge your ideas and then you look at the evidence. Like, do I think we landed on the moon? I'm looking at evidence over here. I'm looking at evidence over here. Yeah, I think we did. Okay, but you have to do that with everything.
That's like the scientific method.
Why not? It's kind of fun too to take like a wild idea and just try and like see if that makes any kind of sense. But you. That's what's not happening enough. And that didn't happen during COVID. People didn't get curious. And that was just startling to me. I think that was a real wake-up call for a lot of people is how much they lacked curiosity. And they trusted authority too.
Oh, yeah.
Trusted authority because the doctors are just getting information from on high. It's all this appeal to authority stuff, which going back to this K through 12 system.
Oh, yeah.
Bryce, think about like what makes a good student in school?
Follows the rules, doesn't talk back.
Does what they're told.
Doesn't critical think.
Yeah, does what they're told.
Yeah.
Sit down when I tell you to sit down, stand up when I tell you to sit up.
Yep.
Okay, go to the bathroom when I say you can. I give you information, you just regurgitate it back on the test. That's what makes a good student.
Right.
So we're conditioned. I mean, that's the history of it too, from like the Prussian military and the Rockefellers making factory workers. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is all on Wikipedia. Okay, and then you go out into the world and you just appeal to authority. There's an interesting story. So during COVID, I mean, it's probably like 2 years afterwards, but we're in California. I was wearing a mask at the mall and I wanted to buy my wife a scented candle. So I went to go pick up it was like spring breeze. I don't know what spring breeze is. So I pulled down my mask. As soon as I pulled it down, someone's right there. Put up the mask. I was like, but it's a scented candle. Can I like just smell it real quick? No, I can't. No. So I changed my hair and let me speak to your manager. So I went and spoke to the manager. Manager was like, it's the mall manager said we can't. So I went to talk to the mall manager. Mall manager's like, it's the health code worker. So I called the health code. It's like, it's just on high from the governor. So it was the same thing. It's just pointing up, I'm doing what I was told to do. And no one was thinking they were just following what they were told to do.
Right.
So it's along the same lines. It's just that appeal to authority. And we've seen that with the Milgram experiment. We've seen this over and over again. That's why I talked about this at the summit. Like that's why people tend to, they just go, just tell me what to do. Because they've been conditioned to think like that.
And it's interesting, me as a leader of an organization that has 60,000 people between multiple, hundreds of franchise partners, coaches, clients, and all that. Yeah, I want, teammates that execute and that, follow the vision. But holy smokes, I've been in situations where I've made ultimately bad assessments on things. And I want a team who's gonna be like, hey, no, I actually see it differently. Or we need to look at that piece of data. And I'd like to think I'm right more times than not. But there's definitely been times where my team has saved my butt because I thought we were going here. And if I didn't condition my team to have a strong feedback culture, holy smokes, we could have went off the cliff. So this just is important in all aspects of life and society, in the classroom setting and also from, entrepreneur business setting as well.
Yeah. And to give the devil his due, you have 60,000 employees. If they were all always challenging everything, nothing would get done.
Sure,
schools are big, so I understand why we have to do it this way. I do. I get it. Because you might have a school that has 7,000 students in it or something crazy like that. You can't have them all critically thinking all at once because you have to get them to class. You have to kind of funnel them all in. You're running this big organization. There's a whole bunch of people. So there's a tension there. You want them to be critical thinkers, but you also have to keep them, organized and ordered. And that's the order and chaos. That's back to the yin yang thing. That's back to that balance that you have to meet. And the only way to know if you're off balanced is to constantly challenge, am I off balance one way or the other?
Totally.
But I get it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And for the record, we have 60,000 clients, including teammates, not necessarily employees.
Okay.
We're big. We're not that big yet, though, but we're on the direction.
Yeah.
All right, last kind of general topic, Will. This has been an awesome conversation. It's actually about controversial conversations, and I think this is something that you do really, really well. From your perspective, why do change makers, students, teachers, educators, and leaders need to champion having and leaning into controversial conversations?
I think it's how you work through it. If it's controversial, by definition, then people are going to be on both sides of the issue. Okay, so the biggest, most contentious ones, people talk about, like, don't talk about religion and politics, okay? So you take, political issues, the big ones, whether abortion and guns and immigration and all that kind of stuff. There's a split, maybe not 50-50, but it's actually close to 50-50. Democrat and Republican, it's kind of close to 50-50. It's unbelievable how these presidential elections are always so close.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Wild.
So if there's that many people that disagree with you, lean into curiosity and try and figure it out. Like I just think that there's so much there out there to learn. We haven't figured out the world yet. Consciousness is quite complicated. So let's try and understand each other better. And then we can understand the controversial issues better. You can align with people. You can have where your similar values and stuff like that. You agree on the trunk of the tree. You want to care for your family. You want to, whatever it is that there's so many things that we're all aligned with. The Democrats and Republicans are very aligned with. Okay. But then you might disagree on the branches. So start somewhere where you agree and then you disagree on the branches, and that's okay. There's a whole bunch of different strategies that I teach about this stuff because I think it's really, really important just to move forward with some unity, because Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson, they did not agree, but they worked together. And that's how America came to be so awesome.
Dude.
Is the disagreements.
Yeah.
And they were harsh disagreements.
Yeah.
But that's a beautiful thing, especially if you're like, all right, let's find compromise. Here's why you're wrong. Well, here's why you're wrong. And you keep kind of going back and forth. I like conversation better than debate. I think debate is you're trying to win. So even if you make a good point, I'm going to ignore that as opposed to take that in. I think conversation, shoulder to shoulder, moving the same direction to get to the best ideas is the best way.
Dude, man, you are a brilliant mind, man. This is an incredible conversation. All right, I want to transition to the bonus round if you're up for it.
Yeah.
All right, so what does freedom mean to you, Will?
Freedom would be no shackles. It would be the ability to act in ways that you see best.
We talked a lot about freedom of thought and speech today. What would you say in the flip side of the coin, the advocates of cancel culture and censorship? What would you say to that?
I mean, if I would argue on their behalf, I would say that there's dangers to that. I mean, if you look in a zoo, the zebra in the zoo is safe. So the idea is if you're out in nature, you're free, but you're not safe. Mm-hmm. If you're in the zoo, you're not free, but you're safe. Mm-hmm. So I think that there's a real argument to say that the censorship and limitations on speech and stuff, their argument would be that it keeps you safe. So I understand that argument. I just disagree with it.
I love that framework too.
Yeah.
The zoo, that just really spoke to me.
Yeah.
Who do you study and learn from?
Bunch of different people. I would say the biggest influences in the way that I think would be Jonathan Haidt, the social psychologist. I worked with him a little bit at PatterDox Academy. He's big on viewpoint diversity. I think Jordan Peterson has been really great, really influential on me and my teaching. Probably one of the biggest influences on me. So those two, and then I'm also a Christian, so I looked at biblical wisdom as well as to kind of guide me as far as morality.
Love it. Who is your biggest hero? And who's your biggest enemy?
Oh, man. Biggest hero. Yeah, I would have to go. So the way that when I say that I'm a Christian, part of the reason I came to that late in life, part of what that is I look for the ideal. The term sin means to miss the mark. So you're aiming for the bullseye. If you miss it, that's a sin. So anytime you don't hit the ideal, that's technically a sin. Okay, so you go, what is the ideal? What is the ideal? And you ask someone, even if they're not religious, and you say who was historically, who's the story of the best person? The worst person, everyone says Adolf Hitler. Who's the best person? Across the religious spectrum, they would say Jesus is
right.
like that. So I would say that would be, if a hero is someone that you aspire to be like, that's kind of what I see as my definition. I kind of bulk sometimes as saying that I'm a Christian. I'm more of just a Jesus follower, but I would say that he would be the ideal that I'm aiming for, and I fall short every single day, every single minute, but that would be that.
Well, you and me both.
Yeah. The enemy would be anything that is aimed on destruction. So it's anything that's aimed on tearing down. It's very hard to build a house. You need architects and masons and plumbers and electricians, and you can tear down a house with 4 big dudes with sledgehammers. So anything that would be about tearing things down. That's why I was very critical of elements of critical race theory and things like that, because a lot of it, and it's not all nonsense. I understand where it comes from with Kimberly Crenshaw and everyone at the Harvard Law School, but Derek Bell, but it's about pointing out the flaws. And I think that there's a danger when you apply that to everything. So anything that's built on destruction rather than building, I would say would be my enemy.
What is your purpose? Why was Will Reusch put on this planet?
I would say that my job on this planet, my mission is to bring people to the truth. I don't know what that is, but I'm on a journey to it. Bring people to the truth. I think that that's the closest way we can get to morality. And you can do that again through a biblical lens if you want to, is, saying like the way, the truth, the life. You can look at it through, other religious texts talking about what truth is. And I also think that at the end of the day, the danger of censorship is when you censor something that is true,
yes,
then we don't know what reality is. And the whole concept of like, what is this world? Why am I here? Everyone's trying to figure out why they're here. And if you're trying to solve that problem, you have to understand what the problem is. And I think that's getting to truth. So I think that's what my mission is. It's a good question.
From my perspective, you've built a career on really teaching, educating, providing incredible advice for your following, for your students. What would you say, Will, from your lens, is one of the best piece of advice you have received, and why?
The best piece of advice that I have is the family motto for my 3 boys. I have 3 boys, just turned 3, 7, and 9. And every day we drop them off from school, it's, I can do hard things. And I struggle with that sometimes myself, with motivation and everything. But the idea that doing hard things, doing difficult things will just continuously make you better. That could be emotionally hard things. That could be physically hard things. That could be, thinking, critical thinking. Doing hard things, I think, is the best advice, and it's easier said than done for sure. But I think being with Fit Body Bootcamp, I think that is like the physical, getting in there and breaking a sweat is like a good metaphor for everything else. You can see it, you can feel it, and I think that's why physical fitness is so important to getting you, to do hard things elsewhere.
Well, the last question I have for you today, dude, this has been such an awesome conversation. I'm so grateful.
Thanks.
By the way, just for the audience, we met in early 2024 at a networking mastermind, and I ended up sharing my vision of the new branding of the show and some of the things that I believed in, teaching leadership, promoting capitalism, defending free speech. And I'll never forget, the gal next to me walked up to me. He's like, "You have to meet my friend Will." Like, beelined it, introduced us, and I just feel like it's been
right
kindred
away.
spirits.
Like, boom, done.
Totally.
Yeah.
So in any case, I wanted to plug that. But last question being, this is the CEO show, the Chief Executive Officer show. What does it mean to be a CEO to you, Will?
I think being a CEO is about taking responsibility. I think we talked about that a little bit. I think it's the buck stops with you. Truman had that on his desk. I think that's, Jocko Willink talks about that, who's another person that has been influential for me, is this idea that taking full responsibility for the people that are under you, which is a lot, heavy lies the crown. It's not easy, but taking responsibility is, I think, what the CEO is. So, it's the company's gonna thrive or die under you, and it's on you, and that should be motivation. That should be enough to get you up in the morning. So that's what I would say.
Amen to that. I asked one time earlier in the conversation, I'm going to plug this one more time. And friends, if you're not following this guy in social, your mind will be blown. I tell you. Where can our viewers follow you?
Thank you, brother. Yeah. So on Instagram is the platform that I use. I can't get involved in all the other platforms. It's too much. It's just my name, Will Reusch, WILLREUSCH. And then my platform that I'm going to be pulling people from Instagram, because, again, I don't trust Instagram, is PatterDox, PATTERDOX. The name is kind of goofy. The name essentially means dox is belief. And it's the belief that the world is made up of patterns. We can understand from the Fibonacci sequence to whatever it is, in nature, in society, in history. I'm a history teacher. Is you watch these patterns over and over again. If you study patterns, then you can make sense of the world. So there's going to be education for all ages, from K through 12. I have a whole curriculum for teenagers in social science, but then also for adult education as well. So, have these conversations and everything like that. PatterDox.
Heck yeah. More of us, myself included, need to continue to dive into that. And you've been such a great service to me and my audience today, and I just want to deliver that same value back, because you're an inspirational guy, my friend.
Thank you, brother. You too, man. I love seeing what you're doing. It's sometimes when I don't want to get up in the morning, I'm just like, all right, Bryce is doing it. I'm going.
All right, so to finish out, before I shoot for today, I just want to acknowledge you, not only for making the trip, other side of the LA, but for being who you are as a person. I literally wrote this down prior, which we talked a little bit about today in one of your responses, but I respect your vision, I respect your passion, and most importantly, I respect your pursuit of the truth. I literally wrote this down, and we talked a little bit about truth today. So, man, incredible conversation, kindred spirits, and I want to thank you one more time for being on the show.
Appreciate that, Bryce. Thank you.
Well, friends, I hope you got a ton of value from this episode. Assuming you did, my humble request, 2 things: like this and share this with someone who needs to get more information about teaching leadership, promoting capitalism, and defending free speech. And again, I want to remind you, adversity is your advantage. We'll see you in the next episode.